Today on CityCast Nashville, we're talking with Councilmember Ginny Welsch, who represents District 16. She explains why she's calling for a formal audit of the Office of Homeless Services and talks about her proposal to rezone parts of her district to allow for more density and equity for future neighbors. It's Monday, September 15th. I'm your host, Marie Cecile Anderson, and this is what Nashville's talking about. You've called for a formal audit of the Office of Homeless Services, citing financial irregularities in areas such as contractor payments, federal grant compliance, and credit card expenses. What specifically triggered your decision to take this step?
Well, I actually started looking into this back in my first term when we got the $50 million from ARP funding. And we brought in consultants to try to tell us how we should be distributing that money and how we should see things on the ground. And almost immediately, there was a lot of discontent among community providers. And I was the head of one of the committees at that point that kind of did some oversight of that and had a couple of, hearings and things and asked a few questions here and there, and was disconcerted that there was so much chaos in the community. But over the past couple years, things go up and down in that field, obviously. It is such a huge intractable problem, not just here in Nashville, but across this country. And finding ways to actually impact the homelessness situation and actually house more people is very difficult, and things will work differently in different cities. So I was paying attention to things that happen around the country. We didn't seem to be doing everything that we could be doing, given the amount of money we had. Over the past couple of years, I was hearing from community providers. They were asking a lot of questions about, why isn't this money being distributed in such a way that we're actually having more of an impact on the ground? Why are we not getting the referrals that we're supposed to be getting to provide services? Why are things just so convoluted? Why are we leaving beds empty? Why are we doing this? Why are we doing that? So I really started to do a bit of a deep dive into, okay, what is the reason for this? Is it just incompetence with management? Is it that we don't know how to spend the money? What's going on here? And as I started really diving into the finances, I started having more and more questions about the decisions we were making and how this money was actually being expended. It was really kind of mind-boggling to see where some of the money is going and to see how much money was going to things that have literally no impact on the situation with our unhoused people on the ground. It was a lot of different things that came together that said to me, something is not right here, and we really need to look at this department microscopically and figure out what's going on.
If you could pick one of your biggest concerns, what would that be?
One thing that really was very disturbing to me recently was the whole situation with Strobel House and the contract with DePaul USA. DePaul was supposed to be running Strobel House and providing the support services there. And there have been a lot of instances at Strobel House over the past year, instances involving, violence. There was a stabbing. Turns out there was a fire that wasn't really reported in a timely manner. There's been several things that have gone on there. And looking into that, we suddenly discovered that we did not have an active contract in place. And yet invoices were still being paid, invoices that referenced the expired contract, but had the contract amount almost tripled on the invoice. And that seemed to me, I'll just say, disturbing. There are other words that I would rather use, but so that is just a big thing. And I think it's kind of endemic of what's been going on in this department for a very long time, that we do not have the oversight. We do not have a strategy. We do not have anything in place that is actually helping us improve our numbers on the ground. And certainly will not help us improve anything when this ARP funding runs out in 2026, because there's nothing to take anything beyond to keep the people that we supposedly have housed, to even keep them housed.
Yeah, you raised specific concerns about things like department credit card or people being paid under funds that were supposed to be used for landlord engagement. Can you tell us about some of those?
That's it's a connected issue, but really a separate issue. Someone came to me and told me that the money in the landlord engagement fund that was through ARP funding was basically depleted. And so I asked for an internal audit about that issue specifically, because we were getting reports in committee and council that was not showing that account was actually a zero balance or even in the red. So I actually requested an internal audit about that specific issue, which is actually ongoing, and a report should be released about that specific issue by the end of this month. And in the course of all that, trying to figure out where that money might have gone, because, there's all this fancy coding things you have to do, like which account you're taking money out and which fund you're doing, which ARP, all this different stuff. So you can kind of track the dollars. Looking into that, it's when we stumbled on the credit cards, just found that, tens of thousands of dollars being spent on travel to conferences. And I'm thinking to myself, that's more in travel than any other department in Metro, wondering why, when most of those things you can simply, watch online. There was money for apparently the first anniversary party of the office, like $5,000 spent, thousands of dollars on Christmas decorations, things like that are just going, okay, what's wrong with this picture? Maybe I'm wrong about all this. Maybe there really is, a real logical explanation for all of these expenditures, but somehow I don't think so. That's just kind of the tip of the iceberg. And only a full audit is going to let us know really what is going on with this department and really what is happening.
So what are you hoping this audit will uncover, and what's your ideal outcome?
Well, I guess I would be hoping that everything is actually above board in terms of the money. And then we would know that it simply is the incompetence of management, leadership in that department. It's no secret that I've been calling for leadership to be changed in Office of Homeless Services for a long time. But I think what it's going to find is that it is a combination of bad leadership and lack of oversight. And what's most frightening to me in all this, especially in terms of like Strobel House and the DePaul contract, is like it's not just the Office of Homeless Services. This actually goes back to Metro Finance and what Metro Finance is not doing. Metro Finance should be seeing that invoices are being paid against an expired contract. Now, they gave a whole reason in terms of how this was being invoiced through direct voucher or whatever the term is. That to me is not an excuse. We should have fail-safes in there. No grant contracts and money like this, like ARP funding, should ever be allowed to be billed direct voucher if it means that no one in Metro Finance is actually looking at what is being billed and what is being paid out. So it's kind of brought to light a broader issue that I think that we need to really look into in terms of how Metro functions. Because as you know, our budget is billions of dollars. And we know that there are things that we want funded in Nashville that are not funded because we say we don't have the funds. And if we look into this and we find out that millions and millions are going out the door that shouldn't be going out the door simply because there's not proper oversight, that is something that needs to be changed today.
What are your council colleagues saying about this? Do you have their support?
I do. I had heard when I first went to ask for an internal audit that several other council members had also requested audits of OHS for various reasons. I have asked many of them to sign on to this request. And whether they do or not, I really won't know until the day of the audit committee meeting, because they do that through the Office of the Metro Auditor. But I will tell you, since it came to light that I had requested this audit, I have heard from people who are formerly homeless who said they were so glad this was finally being done because OHS had actually done them harm on the ground, and they didn't think that OHS was doing what it needed to be doing to help people like them. And so they said they were going to be contacting the auditor's office to request that this actually be done because they felt like their lives and the lives of people, their friends who are unhoused, have been negatively impacted by how OHS works and doesn't work.
That's hard to hear.
It is very hard to hear. One woman told me that her friend had actually gone to OHS for help and was denied for whatever reason. She didn't go into the details, but she said her friend ended up losing her house and is now homeless. And again, maybe that situation, because when you just say it, it seems like something nefarious could be going. It could seem like many, many things, but we really need to get to the bottom of that to find out what actually is happening and why these things are happening. Because the bottom line is these are people's lives. This department, more than almost any other department in Metro, their day-to-day job affects people's literal lives. It's life and death, what happens out there on the street. It's heartbreaking to see people suffering and struggling when we have so much money to improve their lives and we have so many resources that are being untapped because OHS is simply not taking advantage of them. OHS left 80 beds empty for a year waiting for an encampment to be shut down. This move to shutting down encampments speaks to a broader issue in terms of what we really think about the unhoused in our city, I think. But out of sight, out of mind doesn't mean that people's lives are being improved by any measure. So, I mean, we just need a fundamental overhaul. And I think this is the first step. I hope this is the first step and that it leads to a change in leadership and that we can start getting a clear-eyed look at what we need and how we can make things better, again, immediately. We need to make things better immediately because a lot of people don't have any time to wait.
And winter is coming.
And winter is coming. You know, there's also problems in some of our shelters. We hear that the shelters are not the healthiest places for our unhoused population to be, and that we just need to take care of all these things. And the things we can do it. We know that we can do it. We know what needs to be done, and we're just not doing it. And that's galling to me that we're allowing this to happen, and that from the top down, from the mayor's office, we're not getting the support we need on the ground to say, hey, this isn't working. Listen to the people who have been out here for all these years. I'm working with this population who have been doing this work day to day, who know these people individually. They're not being given the respect that they deserve. Again, it's unconscionable to me, and it just screams for an overhaul from the top down.
You have previously called for OHS's director, April Calvin, to resign or to be fired by the mayor. Do you still feel that way?
I absolutely feel that way. And, you know, I want to make it clear that Director Calvin is not an untalented person. In her previous work with the Salvation Army, I understand that she was excellent at her job. I think she is not excellent in this position. And this is such an important position because of how it directly impacts people's lives. I think she's in the wrong position. And I think that was evident, very evident from the beginning. And I think that it's incumbent upon the mayor to acknowledge that and to recognize that and say, hey, this is not a good fit. Let's get somebody in there who knows how to do this better and who has the trust really of the community. Because the most unfortunate thing about all of this is that it has destroyed trust within the community of the unhoused people themselves and the service providers who work with them day to day. There's just so much distrust that I do not think that Director Calvin could ever bridge that gap and get that trust back, which means that this office will never be fully functional in the way that it needs to be to actually address this problem in a meaningful way.
And that audit committee meeting is on the 23rd, is that correct?
It is. It's on the 23rd. We have new members of the audit committee that were just elected through council. And the audit committee will decide whether or not they feel that the evidence that I have presented them is enough to actually warrant a full audit. I hope and trust that it will, because there's just many, many questions that need to be answered. And again, we're not going to be able to fix the problems we have in this department and the problems that we have on the ground with our unhoused population unless wholesale changes are made. And this is the first step to holding people to account.
Can listeners attend if they're interested?
They can. And if listeners also believe that this audit should be done, they can email the Metro Auditor, Lauren Riley, at lauren.riley@nashville.gov and tell her that they support this request for an audit. And if they have any personal reason for that, they can share that. I think this is a good thing. And if everything is above board, great. I will be the first one to say, okay, great. I was wrong about this. Let's figure out what the other problems are then and dive in. But it needs to be done. We need to have that transparency. We need to have that accountability. And we need to have answers because, good governance demands nothing less than that. And our unhoused population deserves to know that the monies that were directed towards improving their situation on the ground and getting more and more people housed is actually being expended in such a way that that is what is actually happening.
We did reach out to OHS when we first started talking about this story, and their department spokesperson responded to say that this audit includes things that have already been disproven, that they take taxpayer stewardship seriously, and that their record speaks for itself. And we're back with Councilmember Ginny Welsch. We want to move now from our concerns with our Office of Homeless Services to the challenges of building enough houses for everyone. Earlier this year, you proposed a blanket rezoning for some of the neighborhoods you represent, Glencliff, Woodbine, and Radnor. What were you trying to achieve with that proposal?
This kind of relates with what we were talking about in terms of our homeless population. Nashville needs 90,000 new houses. We know that we are going to need that within the next decade to actually house the people that are here and that we anticipate coming. Right now, we're already almost 40,000 houses under what we need to house the people that are already here in Nashville. And the only way that we are going to do that is to change our zoning code to allow more density and to broaden what can be built in Nashville. My district was downzoned in 2003 to single family. And as a result, my district is literally only one of a few that has not grown at all since 2003. We've watched all this growth and development in Nashville. We've watched new investment in the city, and it just kind of skipped over my district. It's like the district the time forgot. I started looking at other cities again. How do they solve these problems? Because again, like so many problems, they're not unique to Nashville. We see them all over the country. So I looked at some other cities of how they address this problem of lack of housing, how they lessened the number of unhoused in their community. And it all came down to changing zoning and using zoning as a tool for the good. Right now, we kind of use zoning as a tool of exclusion. There's a very vocal segment of this city that wants to live in the past. I guess that's the only way that I could say it. They don't want anything to change. They want to pull up the ladder behind them. They hold on to single family zoning that if you know anything about zoning, you know that single family zoning started from a very racist proposition. It was meant to be exclusionary. It was meant to keep the lower classes and minorities from, living side by side with wealthier, lighter skinned, whiter people. That's how this all started. And I looked at some of the studies that our planning department has done. We are very good at doing study after study after study and never actually implementing things. So I dusted off a few of the studies, including Nashville Next, which has never really been implemented, and looked at it and said, this is what our studies say needs to be done. We need to increase density. We need to get more multifamily housing types built. We need to get a variety of housing so that the missing middle housing is what they call it, so that people who are, say, starting out in their career or on the lower end of a socioeconomic or middle part of the socioeconomic scale can actually afford to own a home. We hear a lot of people talking about we should develop the Pikes. Pikes have apartments on them. People should be allowed to buy homes like those before them were able to do, because that's the biggest source of wealth that people have. People should be allowed to build their personal wealth through housing. So I proposed upping the zoning to RM40 and RM20, which would allow a variety of housing types on the lots in Nashville. It included a UDO, an urban design overlay that would guarantee that what was built would actually stay within the characteristics of my district, which was always a workforce housing district. I mean, we were right along the trolley line that carried people from Radnor Yards to downtown to work. So you would see more units and more people could be housed, but you really wouldn't see a change to the character and the feel as you walk through the neighborhood. But that would also increase the walkability and hopefully draw more investment to the community. And it's interesting, in my district, there are kind of two guards. There's an old guard and a new guard. And the old guard doesn't want anything to change. They love the single family zoning. They feel like anything is a threat to the character of the neighborhood and will drive people out if we increase density. The new guard is much younger. They want to increase density without increasing the footprint. They don't want lawns that they have to mow. They want public transport. They don't want the parking spaces. And so it's a real kind of fine balancing act there. My proposal, I think, balanced that, but there was a lot of pushback from people who are just afraid of that kind of change. I had one constituent who posted on social media that what I was proposing reminded her of the projects. So you can take that any way that you would like to take that, but it kind of set the tone for the entire discussion. So right now, my legislation is deferred indefinitely. I was waiting for the infrastructure study, the housing and infrastructure study from planning to come back so I could incorporate some of the things that they are proposing, because everything is falling along the same line. All these studies show that what I'm proposing is exactly what we need to do and is the only thing that can be done to actually meet the housing need that we have.
Will you be bringing it back then?
I will be bringing it back. It will be back in a different form. It won't be coming back in exactly the same way. And that's acknowledging some of the concerns that people had. But there's a way to balance the concerns that people have, also increasing the density. we have to increase density to a very specific degree, or we're not really going to see the change that we need, and we're not really going to see the housing that we need to make a dent. So it'll probably come back, in the first quarter of next year.
What do people need to hear to get on the same page about this?
I think that people need to hear that they're being selfish. They really are pulling the ladder up behind them, and they're being very privileged because I think that people feel like they are holding on to something that they feel very entitled to, while others behind them are simply trying to get a foot on the rung so that they can actually find housing and really establish roots and start building their life, including some wealth in their life. I feel like sometimes people treat the districts, or even the city actually, as if it's an HOA, as if they get to set up some arbitrary rules that they decide because they've been here longer, because there's always this idea that because I've been here longer, it means I get to run things. And it's like, but that's not really how that works. And the other people, the newer people here, they too have a right to grow the city and impact the city. And that will improve the city. The fear is always right that you're going to ruin the city, but we're going to ruin it ourselves if we don't allow this to happen, because as we all know, change happens, whether we want it to happen or not. So we may as well be intentional about it and have some say and control, like by doing zoning and putting in UDOs and things like that, so that we can keep things in a certain line in the way that we want them, while allowing and acknowledging that new blood's going to come in and change is going to come. We can't be selfish and only think about ourselves, and we can't live in the past.
I grew up in Oak Hill, and let me tell you, those people there, they have lived there 40, 50 years. They do not want any change. And it's so hard having those conversations.
It's really hard to have that conversation because, and the thing is, I get it. Change is hard.
Mm-hmm.
But we also know in life, change is inevitable. It comes one way or another. And so to say that we don't want change, that's kind of death, isn't it? Ultimately, that equals death. I mean, stagnation, stasis is death. If I knew the right words, how to convince people, I wouldn't have gone through what I just went through, and Rollin wouldn't have gone what he just went through. It's hard, but ultimately, people just have to understand that, like, what I'm trying to do actually has their best interests at heart. I don't want to see them having to be reactive. I want them to be proactive and say, hey, these are the things that are really important to me. These are the things I want to maintain. But let's acknowledge that the city changes, more people comes, things are going to happen. So let's figure out a way to hold on to what I cherish, but also let other people also learn to cherish what I cherish. And then I can maybe learn to cherish what they're ultimately going to bring.
Sounds like proper communication, which is about my last question here for you. Do you think that as a city, we communicate effectively about issues like the ones we've just talked about?
No. Did you want a more detailed answer than that?
And that's, thanks for tuning in, folks.
I think that as everywhere, we tend to listen to, we got a lot of loud voices here, right? There's a lot of loud people who drive the conversation. And I've said to people, I feel like those wealthier, whiter voices have been driving the conversation about housing for a very, very long time. But the people who don't say anything also have an opinion. And sometimes not saying anything means they're okay with what you're proposing. I structured the way I brought my legislation forth, which has gotten nothing but criticism from my district, but I did it to broaden that conversation and get some of those quiet voices to come into the conversation, and they did. I mean, now there are 700 or 800 people in my district talking about zoning and what they want and what they don't want, and that's a good thing. But I think we have to remember that those silent voices also have something to say, and some of them are saying it with their silence. And some of them are just not getting it through the normal channels. We tend to only use the same thing. We expect people to be able to always be on social media, or have signed up for your newsletter, or they should be listening to this podcast or whatever. And the vast majority of people in my district don't have time for that. They don't do that. They're busy living their lives. They just don't have the time or energy to expend on that. And they trust that the people who are in power that they have placed there with their vote are going to be acting in their best interest. And so I think that we don't communicate well just because we disregard those silent people, and we don't realize that they could be silent for any number of reasons, one of which could be they literally don't even know that this conversation is going on. And we have to find better ways to branch out and bring more of those voices in, but also to understand that the people who who are quiet might just be totally happy with what's being proposed, and they're understanding that life goes on, things are going to change around me, and they're not a threat to me, and that's okay.
Well, listeners at home, I hope that this has you fired up to get in touch with your own council member and talk about these issues, because that's what they're there for. Ginny, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us, and we hope to have you back very soon.
I appreciate the invitation. Thank you so much, Marie.
That's all for today here on CityCast Nashville. And don't forget, you can support this show and get great perks by becoming a CityCast Nashville neighbor at membership.citycast.fm. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell your friends? Rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our Hey Nashville newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Toodles!